You wake up at 3 in the morning with a cold, electric tightness knotting the base of your neck, making every breath feel like you're inhaling heavy cedar dust. This suffocating pressure has been creeping through your chest for months, growing heavier every time a floorboard creaks in your own hallway. You tried ignoring the gut-wrenching nausea, drinking black coffee to stay sharp, and checking the locks twice, but the unsettling fog won't lift. This agonizing tension isn't a sign of aging. It's your body's final alarm system screaming that your foundation is being dismantled from the inside. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the chilling truth behind that weight in your chest. My name is Arthur Thomas Montgomery, and at 74, I am a man defined by the grain of oak and the precision of a leveled floor. As a retired master carpenter, I built this sanctuary for Eleanor, my wife of 42 years, who left me 4 winters ago. Every morning, I still catch the faint, lingering scent of the jasmine she planted by the porch, and I find myself waiting for the rhythmic sound of her tapping the kitchen counter twice when she was happy. This house is a masterpiece of structural integrity, yet without her, the silence feels like a slow-growing rot. My greatest fear isn't death itself, but the terrifying realization that I am becoming obsolete, rusting away. My brother's widow, Brenda, and my nephew, Caleb, are the only family I have left, though they often feel like strangers in my hallway. My days are governed by a strict, comforting discipline. I wake at 5 in the morning to sharpen chisels I no longer use and drink black coffee while talking to Eleanor's portrait. Every Tuesday, I meticulously inspect the foundation for cracks, ensuring the legacy I built remains sound. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. While inspired by true events, certain elements have been fictionalized for narrative impact. I hope you stay with me as this story unfolds into the unthinkable. It happened at 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I was adjusting a hinge on the pantry, a task Brenda insisted was dangerous for my failing coordination. I reached into the bottom drawer of my antique oak tool chest, a sacred space where every chisel has its designated place, and my fingers brushed against something cold. It was a silver key attached to a neon orange tag, resting atop my favorite smoothing plane. The handwriting was hurried but unmistakably Brenda's, bearing the words, "Sold, final walkthrough," in thick black ink. I tried to convince myself it was just an old key from a previous job site, but the plastic felt too new, and the ink too fresh. The logic of a carpenter demands that 2 points create a line, and the second point appeared when I checked the mail later. Tucked between a catalog and a bill was a brochure for Sunrise Meadows senior relocation, addressed to Brenda with a note clipped to the front. The note, signed by a Dr. Harrison and dated April 24, 2026, read, "Assessment finalized, transition scheduled for Friday." My heart hammered as I realized my mahogany desk had been tampered with. The grain was splintered, a fresh wound I hadn't noticed before. A cold suspicion hardened in my gut, whispering of a betrayal so structural and deep that it didn't yet have a name. I spent the next 3 days moving through my own house like a ghost, measuring the distance between Brenda's lies and the structural reality of my life. Every time she entered the room, she spoke in that loud, syrupy voice, treating my 74 years like a disease that needed a cure. I kept a small ledger tucked inside a hollowed-out piece of walnut in my workshop, recording every time she claimed I left the gas on or misplaced my medication. My mind was sharp, yet the atmosphere was thickening with a calculated fog, designed to make me doubt the very floor I stood upon. I saw the termites now. They were wearing expensive perfume and a mask of care. On Thursday at 2 p.m., while Brenda was out at a supposed planning meeting, I accessed my digital bank records using the old desktop Eleanor used for her gardening logs. My hands shook as the screen flickered to life, revealing a hollowed-out shell where my life savings used to be. A series of 6 transfers, each exactly $9,500 to avoid federal reporting flags, had drained my primary account between January 12th and March 3, 2026. The recipient was an entity listed only as Vance Holdings, LLC, a name that shared Brenda's maiden surname. It wasn't just a mistake or a donation. It was a systematic harvesting of 45 years of back-breaking labor. The first concrete anomaly surfaced when I examined the kitchen stove after Brenda claimed I nearly burned the house down while boiling tea I didn't remember wanting. I noticed a microscopic scratch on the digital timer dial, a mark that could only be made by someone wearing a heavy, decorative ring, exactly like the sapphire band Brenda wore. She was deliberately setting the stage for my failure, creating a narrative of incompetence to justify the 24/7 care she kept whispering about into her phone. I realized then that my house wasn't just being sold, it was being used as a weapon against my sanity, a cage built from the very wood I loved. A sharp knock at 4:30 p.m. brought Mrs. Elena Gable to my porch, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a professional intensity that cut through Brenda's practiced charm. As a senior social worker with 20 years of experience in property fraud cases, she didn't look like someone who accepted easy answers or superficial smiles. She explained she was there to conduct a routine property transfer alert check, a phrase that chilled my blood, even though I had expected the worst. Elena looked at the intricate crown molding I'd carved for Eleanor, her eyes softening for a brief second before she turned her clinical gaze back to the folder she held. Elena sat at my mahogany dining table and dropped the first heavy stone into the silence. The house was already listed as sold pending final inspection in the county database. She showed me a digital record of a deed transfer that occurred on April 15, 2026, shifting the ownership of my $850,000 sanctuary to a shell company for a mere $100,000. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen, seeing the home I built with my bare hands reduced to a line of data on a bureaucrat's tablet. The scale of the betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a public record, a death certificate for my autonomy. The second revelation was even more devastating, because it bore my own name in a way that felt like a violation of my soul. Elena pulled out a quitclaim deed and a power of attorney document, both carrying a signature that looked exactly like the one I used on my military discharge papers. Below my forged name was the seal of a Dr. Harrison, a man I had never met, but who had apparently certified my total mental incapacity on February 19th. Brenda hadn't just stolen the walls. She had stolen my identity, using a corrupt physician to sign my life away while I was napping in my garden chair. I looked at the grain of the table, remembering the day I planned this wood until it felt like silk, and realized Brenda viewed this house only as a liquidation asset. To her, Eleanor's jasmine was just a landscaping expense, and my workshop was merely square footage to be appraised and discarded like a piece of old rusted scrap metal. The emotional weight of the betrayal felt like a structural collapse, a load-bearing beam snapping under the pressure of a resentment I had ignored out of a sense of duty to my dead brother. My brotherly debt was the crack in my own foundation that allowed this poison to seep inside the family. The investigation deepened when Elena revealed that Vance Holdings LLC wasn't just a shell company. It was tied to a developer who had already filed demolition permits for the north wing. They didn't even want the house. They wanted the land to build a modern, glass and steel eyesore, where my sanctuary and Eleanor's memories currently breathed. The risk was no longer just about losing my bedroom. It was about the total erasure of my legacy and the destruction of the only place where Eleanor's scent still lingered. Brenda was selling my peace to pay for her own greed, and the timeline was accelerating toward a Friday deadline I was never meant to survive. As Brenda's car pulled into the driveway, Elena leaned in close, her voice a sharp whisper that promised a fight I wasn't sure I could win alone. "We have to act now, Arthur," she said, "before they move you to the facility and change the locks forever." I felt the cold weight of the silver key in my pocket, the one Brenda had accidentally left in my tool chest, and I knew the carpenter had one last job to do. If you have ever had a family member try to take what you worked your whole life to build, Please type the word protect in the comments right now. Do you think Arthur should run or fight? Elena showed me a series of notarized letters from a woman named Sandra Miller, a notary public who had supposedly witnessed my signature on 3 separate occasions in early February. I had never met a Sandra Miller, but her stamp was all over the documents that stripped me of my dignity. Elena's eyes were hard as she pointed out that Sandra was Brenda's cousin by marriage, creating a tight, suffocating loop of familial betrayal. The conspiracy wasn't just Brenda and a doctor. It was a small, hungry army of people I had once shared Thanksgiving dinners with, all conspiring to erase my existence for a commission. The $100,000 sale price didn't even sit in an escrow account for more than 48 hours before it began to fragment into smaller, untraceable pieces. Elena pulled up a transaction log showing that $30,000 had been moved to a luxury car dealership in West Palm Beach on April 18, 2026. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a pair of rusty pliers as I realized my house was being converted into a glossy black SUV for my nephew Caleb. They weren't just stealing my future. They were already spending it on leather seats and chrome rims while I was still breathing the air in my own hallway. My workshop, once a place of creation, now felt like a hunting ground as I discovered a small, blinking lens hidden inside a hollowed-out birdhouse on the shelf. Brenda wasn't just gaslighting me. She was recording my every movement, waiting for a stumble, a spill, or a moment of frustration to use as digital evidence of my decline. The back of my neck prickled with a cold, electric sweat as I realized there was no corner of my sanctuary that was truly mine anymore. Every conversation with Eleanor's portrait was likely being archived in a file labeled Incompetent Stage 3, a clinical weapon designed to lock me away in a windowless room. Elena handed me a photocopy of Dr. Harrison's clinical assessment from February 19th, and the lies written in his sterile script made my vision tunnel into a sharp point of rage. He claimed I was suffering from advanced neurological degradation and recommended an immediate regimen of donepezil and heavy sedatives to manage my supposed aggressive outbursts. I had never taken a single pill from that man, yet the legal record stated I was already a chemical prisoner, a man whose word meant nothing in the eyes of the court. The risk was no longer just about losing my mahogany desk. It was about the forced administration of drugs that would actually melt my mind. We dug deeper into Vance Holdings LLC and found the name that made my knees buckle. Marcus Vance, Brenda's younger brother who had served 3 years for real estate fraud back in 2018. This wasn't just a desperate grab for cash. It was a professional liquidation operation designed to tear down Eleanor's jasmine vines and replace them with a series of gray, brutalist townhomes. Marcus had already signed a contract with a demolition crew scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. this coming Friday, which was less than 36 hours away. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall suddenly sounded like a countdown to my own execution, loud and final. I found a discarded tablet in the laundry room that belonged to Caleb, and the text messages I saw between him and his mother felt like splinters under my fingernails. On March 15th, Brenda had messaged him saying, "The old man is suspicious. Keep the stove dial turned up when he's in the garden." My own nephew, the boy I taught to carve a dovetail joint, was the one actively sabotaging my safety for the promise of a down payment. The betrayal was structural, reaching into the very DNA of the Montgomery name, and the pain in my chest was so sharp I had to grip the counter to keep from falling. Elena showed me the brochure for the Level 4 memory unit at Sunrise Meadows, and it wasn't a retirement home. It was a high-security warehouse for the forgotten. The facility had been cited for 12 safety violations in 2025, including the unauthorized use of physical restraints and a total lack of outdoor access for residents. Brenda had already signed the no visitor clause, meaning once I passed through those double-locked doors on Friday, I would be effectively erased from the world. I looked at my calloused hands and realized that without Elena's intervention, these hands would be tied to a bed rail within 48 hours. while Marcus Vance bulldozed my life. The final layer of the trap was a temporary emergency guardianship order that Brenda had filed in a neighboring county to avoid detection by my local friends. The order gave her total control over my physical person, allowing her to call the sheriff to forcibly remove me if I showed any sign of resistance or confusion. Every step I took toward the truth was being used as a justification for my incarceration, creating a legal paradox where my sanity was the very thing that proved I was dangerous. My stomach churned with a nauseating mixture of bile and adrenaline as I realized the laws built to protect me were being used to bury me alive. At 6:45 p.m., the front door creaked open, and Brenda's voice sliced through the air like a cold blade, her footsteps echoing with a heavy, predatory rhythm I had never noticed before. She wasn't alone. The heavy thud of work boots told me that Marcus Vance had arrived to oversee the final cleaning of his new property. What they were planning to do to ensure my silence before Friday is something so dark and calculated that it still makes my hands shake as I recount it today. Warning: the details of their final plan are deeply disturbing, and if you are sensitive to themes of elder abuse, you may want to stop watching now. Elena reached into her briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet, her face pale as she displayed a series of scanned medical prescriptions from 4 years ago. My eyes blurred as I recognized the name on the top of the pharmacy logs: Eleanor Montgomery. The dates were from the final month of her life, a time when I believed her sudden stroke was an act of God that I couldn't prevent. But the record showed a lethal cocktail of blood thinners and contraindicating stimulants, all ordered by Dr. Harrison and picked up by Brenda Vance. The house felt like it was tilting, the structural integrity of my entire past collapsing under the weight of this new, terrifying evidence. My heart didn't just break. It felt like a support beam splitting in a winter freeze, sending a jagged, freezing numbness through my limbs. The realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. Eleanor hadn't just died. She had been meticulously liquidated like a surplus asset to clear the path for this property grab. I gripped the edge of my mahogany workbench so hard the grain bit into my palms, the physical pain grounding me as my lungs struggled to pull air. Brenda hadn't just waited for me to grow old. She had actively engineered the silence that had haunted these rooms for 4 winters, all to reach the equity hidden in these walls. Images of the past flashed before me, sharp and cruel as broken glass. I remembered the afternoon I found Brenda in Eleanor's garden, holding a discarded pill bottle with a smile that I had mistaken for grief-stricken exhaustion. I recalled the way she insisted on helping with Eleanor's evening tea, her hands steady as she moved through the kitchen I had built for my wife's joy. The love I felt for my brother David, the man whose dying wish was for me to protect his widow, curdled into a bitter, acidic poison in my throat. I had allowed the wolf into the nursery because of a promise made in a hospital room, and Eleanor paid the price. The grief that had been a slow rot for 4 years suddenly transformed into a tempered steel resolve, a carpenter's focus on removing the diseased wood before the whole structure fell. I looked at the hidden camera lens in the workshop birdhouse, and then at Elena, my voice dropping into the low, vibrating tone of a man who has nothing left to lose. I am not just a victim anymore. I am the architect of the reckoning that is coming for Brenda and Marcus at dawn. Before we proceed to the final confrontation that will change everything, I need to know, are you still here with me, standing for justice? Type ready in the comments if you are watching now. Friday morning at 8 a.m., the demolition crew idled at the curb, their heavy excavators looking like yellow vultures waiting for a carcass. I stood on the porch I framed in 1992, feeling the weight of the hidden workshop remote in my calloused palm. Inside the foyer, Mrs. Elena Gable and Detective Miller were positioned behind the oak partition, their digital recording devices active and perfectly silent. I had already secured the physical evidence of my brother David's true will, hidden behind a loose brick in the chimney. The morning air was crisp, smelling of wet pavement, and the jasmine Eleanor loved. Everything was leveled, squared, and braced for the impact of a truth that would shatter Brenda's heist. At 8:15 a.m., Brenda's black SUV screeched into the driveway, followed closely by Marcus Vance in his glossy, ill-gotten luxury sedan. They stepped out with the arrogance of conquerors, Brenda clutching a clinical clipboard and wearing that nauseating mask of fake pity. "Arthur, why aren't you packed? The transport to Sunrise Meadows is 10 minutes away," she shouted, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear her performance. I didn't move an inch, my eyes locked on the sapphire ring she used to scratch my stove dial. "The house isn't for sale, Brenda, and the only person taking a trip today is you," I said, my voice vibrating with a cold, architectural finality that made Marcus freeze. Brenda laughed, a shrill, desperate sound that didn't reach her eyes as she shoved the forged quitclaim deed toward my face. "You're confused again, Arthur. The dementia is making you aggressive, just like Dr. Harrison warned," she hissed, her fingers trembling against the paper. Marcus stepped forward, his hand reaching for my shoulder to force me toward the car, but the front door swung open fully. Elena Gable stepped into the light, her silver-rimmed glasses reflecting Brenda's sudden terror as she held up the real-time bank logs. "We've tracked the $100,000 transfer to Vance Holdings, Brenda," Elena said, "and we know exactly which dealership received the first $30,000 for Marcus's car." The silence that followed was heavy, like a house settling into a sinkhole, until Brenda's mask finally cracked and fell away into rage. "You old fossil, you were supposed to be drugged and gone by now," she screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She admitted everything in that moment of explosion: the gas on the stove, the hidden cameras, and the lethal cocktail she used on Eleanor. "I deserved this house for the years I wasted on this pathetic family," she yelled, her confession echoing off the mahogany walls I polished with my own hands. She didn't realize Detective Miller was already stepping from the shadows, his handcuffs gleaming under the bright foyer lights. Detective Miller didn't waste a second, pinning Marcus against his own luxury sedan, while another officer forced Brenda's arms behind her back. "Brenda Vance Montgomery, you are under arrest for first-degree property fraud, identity theft, and the suspected homicide of Eleanor Montgomery," Miller recited, his voice a hammer hitting a nail. The demolition crew turned their engines off and retreated as the reality of the $850,000 recovery operation began to sink in for the crowd. Brenda's screams for a lawyer were silenced by the heavy thud of the patrol car door, a sound more satisfying than any cabinet latch I had ever fitted. The vultures had been driven away from the sanctuary, leaving only the scent of justice. The legal reckoning was swift and surgical, leaving no room for Brenda or her accomplices to crawl back into the light. Brenda was sentenced to 22 years without parole, while Marcus received 15 for his role in the racketeering and demolition conspiracy. Dr. Harrison's medical license was permanently revoked on May 12th, and he is currently awaiting trial for 3 counts of felony medical endangerment. Every cent of the stolen $100,000 was clawed back from Vance Holdings, and the $30,000 SUV was liquidated to pay for the repairs to my workshop. I watched from my porch as the last police cruiser left, the structural integrity of my life finally restored to its true level foundation. 6 months have passed since the yellow vultures left my curb, and the silence in this house no longer feels like rot. It feels like a well-earned Sabbath. I spent the summer reinforcing the north wing, and now the oak joints are tighter than they were 40 years ago. Caleb comes over on Saturdays, his hands finally learning the patience of a chisel rather than the greed of a quick sale. We replanted Eleanor's jasmine by the porch yesterday, and as the scent filled the evening air, I tapped the kitchen counter twice, knowing she finally heard my piece. My soul is level again, and I can breathe without the weight of the dead pressing against my ribs. I am speaking directly to you now because greed often wears the mask of family concern before it tries to bury you alive. They think because our hair is gray, our minds have turned to dust. But they forget that a master knows every structural secret of the cage they try to build. Structural integrity is not just for buildings. It is the fiber of a man who refuses to be obsolete. Remember, God doesn't like ugly, and he certainly doesn't like thieves who use love as a weapon. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment below with your story. While inspired by real events, some elements were fictionalized for narrative and dramatic impact.